I got two speakers coming on right now, Ian McDonald and Gideon Shapiro, the CEO and the co-founder of Bright Minds Biosciences, respectively. There's Gideon. I see Ian joining via audio, and we're going to also share Ian's presentation here. Guys, welcome to the Benzinga Global Small Cap Conference.
Great to be here.
Let's go right into it.
Thanks so much for having us. All right, I'm Ian McDonald, CEO and founder of co-founder of Bright Minds. You're looking at one of our other co-founders, Gideon Shapiro. My background is in investment banking, and in around 2015, I started getting interested in the serotonergic field and really understanding what an impact that these drugs could have on one's mind, not only in mental health disorders, but also in other neurological conditions such as epilepsy. And the drugs that are on the market, quite frankly, weren't good enough. The most common class of drugs that works on the serotonergic field are SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which effectively flood the brain with serotonin in a very undifferentiated manner. But we felt there was a better way, and the serotonin 2A receptor is frequently known as and commonly accepted as the psychedelic receptor. And you've probably heard of a number of compounds that hit that receptor that have recently come in vogue for mental health conditions. Compounds like psilocybin, LSD, MDMA. And while those compounds certainly work, and they work incredibly well, you're seeing efficacy of up to 70% in some cases. That's considerably higher than what you're seeing with the prior generation of SSRIs. So we have a potentially transformational new class of medicines that's coming in, but those medicines aren't perfect. What we have are very efficacious compounds, but they lack a lot of the drug-like characteristics necessary for them to be embraced by big pharma. So I got together with Gideon, who is, in my opinion, and I think around the scientific community, one of the sharpest brains in drug development. And what we've done is assemble a team to create the next generation of drugs that address those liabilities associated with the first group of compounds, so that these drugs can be brought to greater patient populations. And I'll turn it over to Gideon, who can share a few words about his background and get into some of those major problems with the first generation of psychedelics that we're looking to address.
Thanks, Ian. So I'm a trained chemist, been 30 years in the business. I started my career in big pharma at Sandoz in Switzerland. Had the pleasure of actually working in the same department and seeing Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, speak. And in that tradition at Sandoz, which then became Novartis, had my career basically in the CNS department, many drugs. Sandoz was very renowned for CNS drugs in Alzheimer's disease and some of the best psychiatry drugs as well. So had that great start in big pharma, how to develop and invent really novel, best-in-class brain drugs as a background. And then most recently, I moved on to Fidelity Venture Companies. The latest have been working on and seeing the power of this essentially new wave and paradigm shift in psychiatry at Rugen, where we had basically wanted to take a completely new approach to treating psychiatry at the root cause. And there we had independently discovered and worked on second generation ketamine analogs. Ketamine is now recognized as the biggest breakthrough in psychiatry in 50 years. Essentially now is effective. There has been nothing really effective at treating MDD, major depressive disorder, until now. The SSRIs and classic big pharma drugs didn't work at all for major depression. And now with ketamine, essentially, there's a breakthrough, but again, we saw that there are problems with ketamine as a therapy, and you need second generation drugs with less side effects. But the excitement is that essentially the recognition that psychedelics and ketamine as the first drug is essentially a brain reboot. So essentially, it's a circuit disorder and can be treated sort of like what we call a chemical electroshock, where one treatment you don't need a pill every day. You can basically get a treatment once a week or once every 2 weeks intermittently to treat your disease and treat it effectively. And so the real excitement now is that we're witnessing the same thing with psychedelics. They are also capable of this new paradigm of essentially rewiring the brain. If you view it as a circuit that's in disorder, you can essentially trip the brain back into it. And that the interesting thing about that is that underlies many different psychiatric conditions. So with one sort of fundamental mechanism, you can treat major depressive disorder or PTSD, these features that have common treatability with this mechanism. So that's really exciting. And the psychedelics really have not been approved, but clearly have been shown this first generation with psilocybin in the forefront can do that. So there's no question about the efficacy of the drugs. The problem with the first generation drugs are threefold. One is that essentially there's a toxicity issue that's much more serious, in fact, than for ketamine, which has to do with the fact that they're not selective for the particular subtype of receptor that Ian mentioned. And so there are other subtypes of the serotonin receptor, particularly the 5-HT2B, where you get cardiotoxicity. And so essentially, you're very restricted in the dosing that you can do. Now, currently only 2 doses can be given. And what we know from the experience with ketamine and other drugs is that you will need more frequent treatment and administration to treat a broad range of patients. So really to expand the power of the psychedelic therapy to large patient numbers, you need a second generation drug that's safer, that doesn't have that fundamental toxicity issue. And second of all, the trip time or the psychedelic experience, you want to minimize the duration. So the current drugs essentially last for 6 hours or more until you can be released. And we know from ketamine that you can certainly be released earlier with a better, shorter half-life drug, in essence. And then finally, to really make it mainstream, in addition to these improvements, you'd want intellectual property. So the current generation of drugs are very hard to do business with, and big pharma and command the pricing and market potential to get more investment dollars to do these things, to make them reach more patients. So those are the three fundamental issues that need to be solved. And we see this all the time in big pharma. There's always a first generation drug that works but has defects, and then the second generation eventually replaces it. And that's essentially what we're doing here with a team of big pharma veterans with a deep bench who have that experience, and that's what essentially we've been doing as a team essentially in our careers for decades. So that's it. This next slide basically shows you the picture of the heart valve toxicity. So this is the team that we've assembled to do that. To do that.
Our third co-founder. Sorry, I'll let you continue, Gideon.
Yeah. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what we're doing, and we have a pipeline of therapies as well. As a big pharma deep bench addressing many indications. So I'll let Ian introduce the team of our bench here. Go ahead, Ian.
Thanks so much. So the three co-founders are there. The three co-founders are there to the left of your screen. Myself, Gideon, who you know, and Alan Kozakowski, who is a genius professor after studying at Harvard and a couple other prestigious institutions. He went on to a very successful career as a neuroscientist, creating a lot of psychoactive drugs, and really was a leader in serotonin. We managed to lure him out of retirement. He's an old friend of Gideon's from their Berkeley days. And he is a really core part of Brightmind's team, not only because he's very experienced, but he's worked in this specific field addressing the specific problems that we've been targeting. And he's spent many years and millions of dollars before we started Brightminds. In addition, we also have a very talented chief medical officer, who studied, used to work at Stanford, Columbia. After that, she became a chief medical officer and has been responsible for bringing a lot of drugs to market. And I'll turn it over to Gideon to tell you about the rest of our team and how they fit in.
So the rest of our team are essentially what you need is the leading scientists in the field of psychedelics and 5-HT or serotonin. John McCorvey is well recognized as probably one of the foremost researchers. And what you really need to do in this is you need to know the receptor pharmacology and how they signal and how they function to make selective drugs that we're doing as second generation. So he's a key leader in the area. And then we have as well the UC San Diego, the animal pharmacologist is really key for characterizing the drugs preclinically. And then we have a deep bench of ex-pharma executives and managers in drug development, toxicology, pharmacokinetics are very important for making a drug that's tailored for human use. So essentially, we've got the deep big pharma bench. And the nice thing is we're already positioned to partner. So essentially with this team and our assets and our patented technology, there's a lot of interest already from big pharma in this space that otherwise would be potentially, a difficult space for them to enter themselves, and certainly would want to partner with the leading biotech companies. So this is the portfolio where we are essentially. We've got a lead program with a proprietary drug that's patented, it has patent protection up to 2036. Composition of matter, it's issued, and that's positioned to enter phase 1. It's a 5-HT2C selective drug. A lot of interest now basically advancing in infantile seizure disorders, where the cannabis field got started, but now it's clear that serotonin and its 2C receptor has been very effective. A drug called fenfluramine or Fintepla has been approved, which has to be safety monitored. And essentially what we have is a safer drug that's recognized now with this mechanism as being effective. So we're well positioned with that and have a pipeline of other indications that are also well recognized for this receptor subtype in basically impulsivity disorders in neuropsychiatry, namely opioid substance abuse disorder, and binge eating. So we have a lot of opportunities in classic big pharma markets for a non-psychedelic selective drug in the 2C field. And then the gem, or really the crown jewel, is in 5-HT2A with this major market of depression and PTSD that's well recognized but needs a safer drug. So with our psychedelic pipeline slightly behind that, we're well positioned now as a portfolio company in this receptor 5-HT2A and C. So that's where we are with that. Ian, I turn it over.
And just to put the market size for these indications into scale for you, what we have here are very large problems, and problems that, when on patents, command quite a large sum. So if you look at major depressive disorder, for an on-patent drug, you're seeing up to $35,000 per patient per year. You multiply the two, and that's a potential $600 billion market. PTSD equally is pervasive of a problem. Is an absolutely enormous market as well. You're looking at around $275 billion for that. Alzheimer's disease, psychosis, opioid use disorder, binge eating disorder, all very large markets that, if we find a successful drug, would make us into a multi-billion-dollar company. Bright Minds is different. Bright Minds is really inventing the next generation of drugs. And when you innovate in biotechnology, that means you can have proper intellectual property on your molecule. If you're just taking forward a natural product like psilocybin, it's unpatentable in any real sense. So what you're left with is a generic drug. For a generic drug, that means basically anybody can sell it after some relatively minor legal hurdles and regulatory hurdles. So you're left with a drug for an indication like depression, which would sell for, on average, around $400 per patient per year. And take that in comparison to an on-patent drug, where you would be charging anywhere from, call it, $10,000 on the low end to $35,000 on the higher end for a patented therapy. And that's really the important takeaway from a financial perspective on new chemical entities versus generic drugs. Our valuation is incredibly cheap relative to our peers. This slide is a little old. The valuations are considerably higher for Field Trip and Atai. Ours is around $80 million today. We view our program with our portfolio and our programs, we should be valued considerably higher, and we feel that will probably be something that will come as markets recognizes what we have. We will be also listing on NASDAQ within the coming months, which will open us up to considerable more eyes and potential investors. That's all. I think we'll open it up to questions if there are any.
Well, if I know our audience, I would imagine there would be some questions about psychedelics. Let's see. Refined Warrior from the chat. Also, I was told my mic is not loud enough, so hopefully that's a little louder for you all. Refined Warrior in chat wants to know about anorexia. You mentioned binge eating. Would be curious to see if there are other treatment options for anorexia, for example.
So they're very different diseases. The two, and anorexia is particularly hard. So I think definitely the impulsivity is really the key, which is not quite the case with anorexia. So I wouldn't see this as an anorexia drug. And already there's a big difference between drug prescription and psychiatry for those disorders. So there definitely has to be an education. There's a war between psychiatrists in that field who don't think patients need medicine versus medication. So I think we'd stay away from anorexia initially.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and it also I'd mention that we believe our drug would work for bulimia. That's a very related disorder to binge eating disorder.
Excellent. All right. I think that's all. Ian McDonald. Yeah, I don't see any more questions from the chat. Ian McDonald, CEO, and Gideon Shapiro, Vice President of Discovery and co-founder, Bright Minds Biosciences, ticker BMBIF, here in the U.S. Ian, Gideon, thanks so much.
Thank you.